And we're talking about the future tonight. Since we're doing critical thinking in this week's discussion, we're talking about critical theory and critical thinking. We're going to use a little bit of that in talking about the future. So what you're about to learn is going to improve your skills, but it's intended for mature and open-minded students. Using Futurism to connect with content. That's something we aspire to do in all of our classes. The World Future Society website quote says the future doesn't just happen, people create it through their action or inaction today, and I think we can all agree with that. Back in the agricultural age, things moved fairly slowly. Things moved at a very deliberate pace, and you could kind of anticipate what was going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And then the Industrial Revolution came along, and things moved a little bit faster, but it was still fairly predictable. During the Industrial Revolution, we still had time to plan for things and prepare for things. But in this day and age, things move quickly. The future comes at us very fast, and we aren't always prepared for what's going to be happening and what's going to be changing from year to year and day to day. So we need to think about how we're going to navigate in the future, what direction we're going to go, how we're going to get there. One new noted futurist talked about learning and said that learning needs to expand to include the future. And what she meant by that was we don't do much in the way of projecting into the future and helping you as students to think about the future, what might be happening in 5, 10, 20 years from now, so you can prepare yourself either through training, education, financially, whatever means it is to prepare for the future. Why do we need to do this? Well, we need to have a sense of responsibility. We need for you and for other students to have that sense of responsibility. You are making your own future. Now, you're a little more non-traditional students, so this doesn't apply as much to you as it would be undergraduate students or younger students, but it still applies to all of us. We need to connect our choices to long-term outcomes. We need to understand what we do today is going to impact what happens to us 5, 10, 20 years from now. But if we're not sure or we have given no thought to what's going to happen in 5 to 10 years, it's difficult to make present choices. And we also need to develop tools to help us to navigate a rapidly changing world. So I want you to complete this sentence. I want you all to type in your chat box, in 2025, I believe that. Make it as short sentence as you want, but type in your chat box, in 2025, I believe that. And this is something, it could be personal, it could be something professional, it could be something about the world in general. I can believe I can achieve whatever goal I set. I will be in a better place than I am today. I will have completed my master's degree. I will be teaching. I will be in a new house. Higher education will be more affordable. I will have all the degrees I hope to complete. I believe I will be the academic director at my school. Ambitious. I believe that I will have peace of mind. I do praise those, Aretha. I will have retired from the Army and teach in college. The world is going to be in trouble. That's another perspective, Crystal. And that's shared by a lot of different people. So that's quite a handful there. I'll be retired early and running my own business, starting a new career. All right. And those are all based on a number of factors, kind of guessing what it'll be like or hoping what it'll be like. But the point is, if you don't think about the future, then you can't have one. And there's a lot of things that we need to consider when we're looking in the future. So you're considering this is what it's going to be like in 2025, but have you considered all of these trends and these driving forces that are going to influence whether or not you're going to be able to get where you want to go? So it's based in part, you base our future choices or our hopes for the future, our plans for the future based on what we think is happening today, hoping or projecting out that things will not change that much. But there are factors that do come into play. So we need to be prepared for what ifs, what would happen if certain things are going to happen. Things like technological progress, economic growth, mobility, all of these different factors. So when we're looking at the future, we always look at trends and driving forces. If you think about trends like the consumer price index or housing starts or oil prices, life expectancy, all of these different things are going to affect your ability to achieve the future that you hope to have. Can you think of any other trends or driving forces that would affect all of us, that can have an impact on all of us, or have an impact in your industry or the profession that you hope to be in 10 years? Can you think of anything else besides things like this? What other factors, trends, driving forces can affect your future? Any thoughts on that? Think about climate change. Think about immigration, how that might affect this. Birth rates, good. Birth rates are important. Birth rates here, birth rates overseas, birth rates in other countries. Politics, obviously at this moment, obviously politics is very unpredictable. World threats, food prices, legislation, good. The politics, the legislation, people will be less social than they are today. I guess that could be a possibility. The trend towards more social media and less personal interaction might be a factor. These are all things that we want to consider when we're looking to the future. Here's where you get some of these trends. There's a lot of different places you can get trends. It's a very busy slide, but there's lots of different websites and different places that we can get information. And if you're a real futurist and you're really forecasting the future, you would use a lot of these different sites to collect as much data as you can. Because if we're informed, we can make good choices. So now we're not going to form small groups because we're obviously not in the classroom. And I'm not going to break you out into breakout rooms. But I want you to discuss two questions with me. First of all, what trends or forces have shaped you, your industry, your field, your profession over the past 10 years? What are the trends? What kind of things have really shaped your industry over the past 10 years? Think back to 2005, 2006. What kind of trends or, okay, Afghanistan, the wars, good. Social media. For a lot of us, for some of us, the wars in Afghanistan had little impact on us. But for others, it had a lot of impact. So wars, global wars, the housing crash, the economics, wars, technology, right? Unemployment, workforce training, and community. Okay, the change in focus to community college. That's a good one. Customer demand, the expectation for higher services, crime. In some parts of the country, that would be true. In some parts of the country, that would be not true. So it depends on where we are, but there are definitely trends that affect our industry. Of course, it depends on whether you're in law enforcement or not, whether or not crime has an impact on your profession. Accessibility of training, importance of early childhood education. Very good. Okay, so what trends will shape our future over the next 10 years? And think again in terms of these areas. Like, I say mobility, increased mobility is the ability of people to move around the world. Excuse me, to move around the country, to move around the world. People cross borders. They can be from here. You can be in Africa in 15 hours. And so think about what happened with Ebola. Because we're so mobile, diseases that normally we'd read about and say, oh, that's awful over there, but we weren't really concerned. Now things like Ebola and the Zika virus can be here in a matter of hours. So we think about that in terms of mobility. So what trends are going to shape your future in the next 10 years? Medical advances. That's good. I think medical, healthcare is going to be much different in the next 10 years. It's definitely going to shape our futures. Presidential, absolutely, Valerie. The outcome of this election is going to shape our future. And we don't know the outcome today, but if I had to make choices today that would affect my life 5 to 10 years from now, I might want to say, well, if one party gets in, I'll make one choice. If another party gets in, I might make another choice. It might affect whether I'm going to buy a house, whether I'm going to move to a different state, whether I'm going to go into a different career or not. So thinking about all the things that are happening in the next 10 years, what kind of things are going to affect you in the next 10 years? Is there something different than what affected you 10 years ago? Right, or a different country. For some people, they will probably move because of the election. And that's a valid, on both sides, on both parties. People have said they would move depending on whether the Democrat or Republican was in office, particularly if it was Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. So if we look back to the past and say, well, what shaped us what brought us to this point? that can help us to determine will those same trends and forces drive our future. If that's the case, well, we can have a fairly reliable predictor of what's going to happen in the future based on the past. That's good. But what if there are other things that are going to happen that are unknown, that did not affect the past, that may affect the future? It'd be good to think about those things and recognize what they might be. All right, so let's move on from here. Okay, no more right now. So if we wanted to, we could prioritize these forces. And so think about your personal life and think about your personal experience and the trends that have shaped things. How would you prioritize those trends? We could do that right now. We could say which ones were the highest priority, which forces will have the biggest impact in the future. And if we were futurists and we were going to forecast in the future, we could say which ones were the top priorities. Say technology would be the #1 priority that's going to shape your future, or the economy. Politics. Now, I guess, Sean, you're saying politics first, economy second, technology third. And we could do this. Now, for each of us, it may be different depending on where we're going in the future. But it would be important for us to do that so we could follow these trends and recognize where are we going in the future. And how is that, more importantly, how is that going to affect my decisions? Charles Kettering says, my interest in the future because I'm going to spend the rest of my life there. It's a pretty bold statement, I suppose. We should be interested in the future. We should be interested in forecasting the future because that is where we're going to be. So if you're thinking about the future, there's 3 things you have to remember. You have to be realistic. You can't be pie in the sky. You have to base things on a firm foundation, but you have to be a little bit creative too. We're going to simplify some things and oversimplify things that are very complex, because complex realities, complex trends, and issues in the future are almost impossible to predict accurately. But we can simplify things and say, well, I don't know exactly what's going to happen if Donald Trump got in office. But I can simplify it down and say here's a few basic things that are pretty good bet that this would happen. And we can think about potential realities. That's the other third part of being a futurist. And one way we can do this is by using future wheels. And when you use a futures wheel, you start with the change that the change you're interested in, and you put that in the middle of your wheel. So if we're looking at a specific change, I'll give you an example in a minute. We would put that in the center. And when we consider that change, we would then look at the first order consequences. What would be the first consequence of that change? Just for an example, let's say Hillary Clinton was elected. What would be a first order consequence? And we would put down all of those immediate consequences that we could probably expect to have happen. And then from that, we would go out for each of those consequences, we would go out and we would look at what are second order consequences. And then from those, we would go out and look at third order consequences. So we're looking at one basic change, and then what would be the first order, second order, and third order consequences of that change. Let me give you an example. Oh, let me back up. Where's my wheel? Here's an example. This is with the rise in biotechnology, one of the things that we could expect to see is more do-it-yourself testing for water and do-it-yourself testing of food. And as a result of that, you may find people testing their food and finding that the genes have been changed, or there have been genetically modified products that they've been given. And instead of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, you would have consumer cops, which would be you and me, using home testing kits. But as a result of that backlash against GMOs, we could actually see food shortages because we know that genetically modified foods and crops can be produced at larger quantities with less risk of disease, which means if we did away with those, we would have a food shortage because disease and drought and other things would destroy a lot more crops than it does nowadays. So that's an example of what you would look at. Now, based on this possibility, then, based on the rise of technology that could lead to this, we would need to right now think about how can I better prepare for that possibility? If I'm a farmer, how could I better prepare in planning my crop rotation or in irrigation or however, whatever I'm doing to prepare for the possibility that I might not be able to use genetically modified seeds anymore? Here's another example of what can happen. If you had a 20% budget cut, and that could be where you are right now, if you had a 20% budget cut, one of the consequences would you have less external training. Another would be you couldn't invest in information technology, which could lead to less of an increase in productivity, could lead to problems with morale, and you can obviously take these out further and further and think of what other consequences you'd have. And this is what we can do in organizations, and this is what we do in our personal life as well, is look at the potentialities of if this changes, what are the outcomes, what are the consequences that might happen. People talk about renewable energy sources like solar and wind and how important that's going to be and what a great benefit that would be. But if we increase the choices of renewable energy so people didn't have to use oil, oil prices would go down. But if oil prices go down, very poor countries would become oil dependent because they would rely on this cheap oil rather than investing in the more expensive, high technology, renewable energy sources. And we're actually seeing that now. While coal is being used less and less here and in Europe because of advanced renewable energy sources, we're seeing the countries like Indonesia and India are using more coal because now coal is very cheap. Coal and as well as oil. And because of that, we're seeing countries that can't afford the technologies and renewable energy sources using more coal. That wasn't a consequence that people who believed in renewable energy, that wasn't a consequence that they wanted to have happen. It was just something happened because we didn't really consider the consequences of our choices. Now, here are some ways that we can project in the future using the Learning Futures wheel. One way is to pick a possibility. For example, the first one deals with technology. This is one change that we could see happening. Would you agree that that's a possibility? Number one, the gap between poor and uneducated grows because of the reliance on technology, but the inability for the poor to have it. Number two, college has become less important as trades in programming, computer programming, and coding get emphasized more, and there's fewer jobs for college graduates. This is actually a possibility. Number three, private and charter schools double. So we have more and more private and charter schools over the next 10 years because they become popular. And number four, the government funds and guarantees a college education for all. And that's something that you're actually hearing coming out of Bernie Sanders' party. So let's just take that last one, for instance, and let's work with that. Let's see, where is it? Oops. I think I'm picking that one later. Let's see, I was going to pick that. Hold on just a minute, I'll get there. All right, I don't have that one. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to pick, which one do you want me to pick? Let's use 1, 2, or 3. Which one do you want to work with as a practice exercise? 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 it is. Sorry, Jonathan, too late. Sorry, Nick. We're going with number one. So technology is relied on more at all levels of education. So what I want you to do now, you have the ability to use the writing tool. You can either use this tool that I'm using now, or you can use the text box, which is the fourth one down. It's the little text box you can use to enter text on the page. I want you to go ahead and write in one of those red circles, what would be one of the first consequences of this technology being relied on more and more, which increases the gap between the rich and the poor? What would be a consequence if that happened in the next 10 years? What would be one consequence you could see? And you could type that in any of the red circles, either by typing it cost effectiveness, okay? You can either use that little text box up your writing menu, or you can use the little writing tool, which is should be the third one down. So education would be more cost effective because of the use of technology. Desocialization. So because we're doing so much more online, we're not doing things face to face. Smaller college, okay? Colleges will be smaller. We're actually seeing that happen. Some schools are actually closing down because they can't get enrollments up. Smaller college campuses. Handwriting would go away. Now that's an interesting one. That's something that we're starting to see, aren't we? Although there's recent studies have shown that taking notes by longhand on a notepad is more effective in helping you to learn and retain information than using a computer. So for those of you who take notes using a computer, stop doing it and start taking notes on a notepad. Students without access, there will be a lot of them. Location. All right. So let's take desocialization, and let's go out to the green circle off of desocialization. So you have a number of ways you can go. You can go this way, or this way. Put something in the green circle that tells what would be the consequences of desocialization as a result of online tools being relied on more. So I've only got 4, lack of social skills. And how would that affect us? And you can actually type these in the chat box if you don't want to put them into the circles. Just type in the chat box, what would be the consequence of this increased technology which desocializes people, there's less face-to-face contact, isolation, and lack of social skills? What mental health issues? Okay, that's a good one. Increase in mental health issues because people are alone and more depressed. Depressive people would be more likely to suffer consequences. More misunderstandings between people. Quality of life issues. Increased globalization. That's true. There's a positive side of that. We could have more socialization globally because we're all online. And the ability to communicate properly with others. And so you can see how this could go. So technology in itself is not a perfect thing. Now, given that you've said all this, the point is, by projecting into the future and forecasting possible consequences, we can right now say and make decisions and choices about how can we avoid this. The technology is there. It's going to be used. What can we do to prevent or to mitigate some of these possible consequences? What can we do to ensure that obesity, that was one that I had not thought about. What can we do to ensure less mental health issues? We know there's a potential because of the isolation and the technology, but what can we do now to plan for that, to prepare for that, to ensure it doesn't happen, or if it does happen, to be prepared to deal with it? What can we do today? And you might use technology to do that. Well, we can allocate more resources. We're going to have to do something or reallocate resources. More access to, okay, sure, that could maybe in our healthcare plans that we include access to mental health more than we do today. We have to engage, but how can we do that, Aretha? How can I plan for that in the future if I recognize this might happen? Can we use technology to have people engage each other more socially other than being isolated? Video teleconferencing, good, Angela. Make sure that we build into all of this technology video teleconferencing live tools to help us to see each other face-to-face, talk face-to-face. How about, okay, FaceTime and Skype? Use the technology to reduce the isolation. How, is anybody familiar, or you've read, I'm sure, about augmented reality, virtual reality, where you can put on a headset and actually feel and sense that you're in a room with other people. Talk to them, walk around. It's a little scary, yeah, it is. But technology is there. No, it can't replace personal relationships. Holographic interaction is something that's coming. It's part of the technology, and in 10 years, I'm sure it will be here. So we can use technology to put people into a virtual space. They're not actually going to touch each other, but it could prevent some of that sense of isolation. But also, as you mentioned earlier, increase access to mental health resources through our health programs, our insurance programs. So this is the kind of thing we do when we're looking at the future. This is something that we would like to do in all college classes to get you to think about the future based on the degree, the program, or the career that you're going into or transitioning into. All right, so let's move on. The point is that the paradigm shift is going to happen. And you could be one of those people that says, well, learning technology is just a fad. It'll never really catch on. Or you could be somebody who's ahead of the paradigm shift and saying learning technology is part of the future. So when that shift happens, those people who are believing it was a fad are left behind completely. And those people who thought it would increase to recognize that and recognize the consequences of that are more prepared to deal with the technology that's coming forward. Even though it may not be comfortable, at least we can plan for it. It speaks for itself. Great explorers anticipated the future because the consequences to them could be fatal. And it may not be as serious an issue with us, but still not recognizing and anticipating the consequences of the future could be detrimental to us all. Now, there's another exercise that we could do, and I'm not going to do it tonight. It's called the Delphi exercise, and I'll walk through it very quickly. It's based on the oracle at Delphi in Greece in ancient history, who supposedly she could predict the future, she could see into the future, and people would go to her to find out what was going to happen in the next battle, or what's going to happen to my child when she or he grows up. So here's the way it would work. What would happen if the government funded and guaranteed a college education for all? What would happen if the government funded and guaranteed a college education for all? What are the forces? Now, this is how we would walk through this, and then I'll give you a chance to answer that. What are the driving forces? What kind of shifts in thinking would need to happen? What are the uncertainties and assumptions you have to make? So just based on this, what are some of the forces that are driving this desire to have free education for everyone? Is it technology? Yeah, technology has something to do with it. More students would attend or pursue, yeah, beyond current levels. That's a consequence. We could direct what's being taught, better opportunities. And what's driving that right now? What is driving this desire to have free college? What are some of the technological or economic trends? Debt, very good. The debt load of students. That's a big driving factor. And the bigger that debt becomes and the more we hear about it, the more pressure there is to fund this college education. So it's not environment, it's not health, but definitely technology and economics are driving this. So what kind of shifts, yeah, in Europe, a lot of European countries also have it. Of course, we have to be careful to recognize that some European countries that have it, they also tell you which track you're going to go in. For example, in Germany, you don't get to choose to go to college because you want to. You get to go to college if you qualify when they review your records, your history, your personality, and they determine that the college track is best for you. And then they limit the number of programs that you can go into. So it's not just free college for everybody that wants to go. It is a lot more restrictive than some people portray it as being. When Bernie Sanders talks about free education, he doesn't explain that you can't just let everybody have free education to go where they want and take any program they want. Otherwise, we'd have a whole bunch of lawyers and we wouldn't have any jobs for them. So, what shifts need to happen? What kind of changes in our thinking would need to happen for this to become a reality? What kind of really paradigm shifts? I'm talking about some major shifts in our thinking. What would need to change in how people think about education and think about funding education for this to actually happen? GPA standards. You have to have serious standards. College is not for everyone, and it's not. Not everybody should be going to college. They have an aptitude and abilities that are much more suited for something that's more of a trades-oriented or a technical-oriented field. So what kind of thinking would have to happen in this country? Less focus on testing? Well, let me give you an example of a conventional thinking. One thing we would have to change is our thinking about taxing, because somehow we would have to come up with the money for this. So we would definitely have to think about the financing for this, and forget about our national debt. Yeah, you have to, and for some people, they'll tell you that the national debt isn't that important. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, but some people say that we shouldn't be so concerned about that. Yes, people would have to be willing to pay for this. I'm not saying who's going to have to pay for it, but somebody's going to have to pay for it, and it's going to have to come from somebody's income, whether it's the 1%ers or the 5%ers or the 10%ers, but somebody's going to pay for this. So these would be major changes that have to happen. So we could talk about uncertainties and what are some uncertainties? Yeah, more focus on student talents and abilities. I agree, Judith. I'd like to focus more on that now, and we don't. We kind of generally just say go to college, but we really don't focus on where they're really going to be best suited. Yes, we have to be more accountable. Absolutely, Angela. We can't just give the money away. We have to be very accountable about where these dollars are spent. What kind of uncertainties are there? What are things that we just don't know? Things that we're not sure that might happen. Are there things that you can think about or think of that we're not really sure about? Okay, well, yeah, we might need to change the entire curriculum that colleges use in degree programs. We're not sure if we would have to change them, because that's a major undertaking. Yeah, big business gets taxed. We could tax big businesses more, and then we could also make them pay more money as a minimum wage. But there is a point at which we have to understand the dynamics of staying in business. So even though that we could, and I agree that there's too many tax breaks out there now. We don't necessarily need to tax companies more, tax individuals more, but maybe reduce some of the tax breaks, which would, by virtue of reducing them, increase the tax income. Flat taxes, everybody pays the same taxes. Yeah, how would you tax people? That's a major uncertainty. In order to do this, you're going to have to change the tax system. And if you're all familiar with how impossible it is to change the tax system in Washington, that's a big uncertainty. Yeah, and some businesses do actually pay tuition assistance. Maybe we should make that a requirement for businesses to do that. We really don't know, because, again, and I think you make a good point, Sean, good luck. There's a lot of uncertainties about this in the future. So we do have to make some assumptions about how this would work. So let me show you how this actually came out in a real-life class that we did in a face-to-face class. These are some of the driving forces. One of them, longer life, means that we have more opportunity to go to college again and again. A lot of the same things that you said. So when it comes to what are the paradigm shifts that would have to happen? Well, states would have to give over control to the federal government in order for this to happen, because the money would come from the federal government. I think you mentioned GPA, entrance exams or qualifications need to be more difficult, and we need to increase the workload so that we can make sure that people are actually going to college and learning something. Right, longer life, more healthcare costs. That's a good point, Sean. People need to start valuing things they receive for free. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of opportunities to gain benefits or entitlement programs, but people don't always appreciate things that are free. And over time, the more you get that you don't have to work for or be responsible for, the less value you put on them. There needs to be funding for technology, because it's going to require more technology to have more people going to college. And we have to change the mindset that education is just a piece of paper. It needs to be about learning. I think somebody mentioned that earlier on about, Angela I think might have mentioned that, about, and Judith, making education something that's more than just getting a degree to get a job. It needs to be about actually learning something. Some of the uncertainties, well, will the competition in the job market level out? What if you have all these people going to college? Where are the jobs going to be? Will people take advantage of free education? Do you think, this is a quote quick poll, yes or no, do you think that people will really take advantage of education, recognizing they have to meet standards, they have to go to college, they have to do the homework, they have to stick with the program, or they might have to pay back the money? So do you think that people would really take advantage of this? Yes, kind of a mixed bag. I'm not really sure. I think some people would, but I'm not sure as many people would as others might suspect. Would it be sustainable over the long haul? Will the higher education lobby gain stronger influence? So if college is offered to more people and there's that much more money, no, I'm one of them, okay. Would the lobbyists, because we know how this happens in politics, would these college, higher education, professional lobbyists become stronger and stronger, get more and more money because it benefits higher education? And think about that. We complain about businesses making a lot of money. Well, think about colleges. Colleges make a lot of money, particularly private institutions. You ever see all the big stadiums and the big buildings and all the stuff that's built on campuses and how much they pay for full-time faculty? Yes, absolutely, Julie. Higher education is a big form of business, and we don't really recognize that. And then finally, some of the assumptions, we have to assume that government will pay for housing, healthcare, and food because these students going to school won't be working. They won't have jobs. So where are they going to live? I agree, Angela. Let them volunteer. That would be wonderful. I think that would be a fair exchange to do volunteer work. But think about the housing and think about the healthcare and food. That's right. You do have to be cautious in expanding government because the more you expand government, the less you have independent choices on your own. We have to assume that technology will drive the prices down. We have to assume there'll be a net positive, that actually people will make more money. Now, I agree, Judy. The AmeriCorps, that was a good program. So was the Peace Corps. But we always say that higher education equals higher income. Do you agree, does everybody agree that higher education, getting a degree, automatically means higher income? Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a misnomer. This is a fallacy or a myth that we have sold to young people, that go in debt, get a degree, and you'll make more money. Now, there are some fields where you definitely will make more money over the long term. But if you consider how much money it costs to go to college and the debt you incur and the time you don't have income coming in, as compared to somebody who went to a trade school and started making $60,000 a year as a journeyman electrician or a plumber, then higher education, becoming a teacher, does not necessarily mean you're going to have a higher income than that plumber. Good. So now you see that's all about futuring and projecting in the future, something you can do for yourself. You don't have to necessarily rely on other people to do it or a big process like this. But whatever we do, it depends on our ability to predict, at least have some ability to predict the outcome of your actions so that you can see what's going to come in the future, what's going to happen to you in the future. So the last thing we do, what's saying is an individual with a 2-year plan makes more than a college graduate with no certifications in the IT field. That's a good plan, Angela, and you're right. I've seen that happen. People with certifications make more money than people with 4-year degrees because the certification is worth more. It's all what the market will bear, what the job market is offering. Now, there's a couple of ways that we end these forecasting sessions, and the final one is to write a scenario. We can write scenarios, and we have different groups that can write different scenarios. A scenario where things just continue as they are, a transformative scenario where we have a complete revolution, the pessimistic scenario where all the worst things happen, that we think could happen, and then the optimistic one and the disastrous one. And I'm not going to have you write those scenarios, but if you write the scenarios out, you can then start to look at how can you protect yourself? How can you prepare yourself for each scenario? So if you see the scenarios actually becoming true, coming to fruition, if in 5 years you say, oh my gosh, this is the worst case is actually happening. Let's say we did fund education for everybody and taxes became so burdensome, businesses started closing down, we had fewer jobs, so even though we were paying for education, there was no jobs. How can you prepare yourself today for that potentiality? And that one way I would suggest you would do that is to have 2 degrees, or is to have a degree plus a trade or a technical skill, to set aside money for a down period, to economically prepare yourself for the next recession or the next downturn in the economy. It doesn't mean you have to be totally pessimistic, but it's being prepared for the potentialities, being prepared for possible consequences. So if we were to do that, we would define the issue, we would gather information, we would identify our assumptions, identify our uncertainties, and I'm going through this because it's getting a little bit late. So this is something I would suggest that you might do for yourself. Looking at the trends in your field, what got you here today, the trends that you think are going to affect your field or your profession or your career in the future, then write a scenario, thinking about what we just talked about. What are some of the assumptions and uncertainties that you need to consider? And then write a scenario. You don't have to pick the disastrous one, but you might pick an optimistic and a pessimistic and a no surprises scenario. And write out for yourself, what do you think might happen in the future? And based on that scenario, what can you do to prepare yourself? Put it into a plan for the year 2035. What do you need to do to be ready for any eventualities? As a famous man once said in J.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, the greatest adventure is what lies ahead. Today and tomorrow are yet to be said. The chances of the changes are all yours to make. The mold of your life is in your hands to break. To be continued. Now, one last thing I want to do, I want to pull up a website, and I'm going to encourage you to go to this website. Just give me 1 minute. Of course, I can never find things when I want them. There it is. I'm going to pull up a link and post it in here and suggest that you go to this website if you'd like to. Well, now I'm having trouble getting to it. Well, I'm just going to have to send it to you because I can't pull it up. And let me look one more place. Should be, well, wouldn't you know, I can't find it. All right, I will have to give it to you. I will send it to you in the announcement. But there's a website where you can go and there's worksheets and all these forms that you can use to start thinking about your future and forecasting your own future. And it's something I would encourage everybody to do in any field. And hopefully we'll start to use that, see this happening more and more in college classes to help people focus more on what's going to happen tomorrow and not what's going to happen today. So that's it for tonight. I went through this rather quickly, but I wanted you to think about this because you're at a place in your careers where you're hoping for things to be a certain way in 10 years, that you'd like things to be certain outcomes in 20 years, but I want to encourage you to really be thinking about planning your future in a way that gives you different options, alternatives, and prepare yourself for consequences. So if there are no questions tonight, I know your wikis are being turned in. you should be working or starting to work on your final learning experience. I'm going to post an announcement, I guess tomorrow, and I will give you some dates and times that you can log in, and I will help you practice using the Collaborate to do your presentations if you would so like to. So I'll create those opportunities, and I'll let you know when they'll be. But recognize there is a chat room, excuse me, a Collaborate room, a section that's continually open. You can go into at any time as a moderator, upload a presentation, a PowerPoint, or whatever you're using, and practice using the different features, microphones, and whatever else you need. Which reminds me, if you don't have a microphone, you really need to try to get one for your presentation. If you don't have a microphone that you can use in Collaborate to share your presentation with us, then you're probably going to have to find some other way of recording it. Or let me know so that I can come up with an alternative for you. Okay? So if that's it, if there's nothing else, good night.